Welcome to this. I really like the way I used to start my Zoom teachings before we had this lockdown and COVID and everything. They weren't Zooms, not Zooms, YouTube teachings, which was good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. So let's start like that. And I had a very funny moment in Samiling. There were a few people sitting on a bench, and I said, good morning. And they looked up and said, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. So welcome back. This is the third of our 4 sessions on Buddhist mindfulness. Like all of these talks on Saturday, it's a frustrating overview because the beauty is in the detail, and we just get a sketch of what so much teaching is about, but I hope it will be helpful. So let's start today with a wonderful motivation. We know we're making karma together here, good karma, strong karma, and that all depends on our state of mind. At some time I should talk about what are called the 3 faults of the pot. And these is advice about how to be during Dharma teachings. So the first one is don't be like an upturned pot, where you have a perfectly good, in theory, container. The only thing is, rather than the open bit being turned upwards to receive what's coming in, the pot's upside down. So although you're in a teaching, your mind is somewhere else and nothing's going in. It's just like if you pour water on an upside down pot, something's happening, but it doesn't really go into you. So we try to be like a right way up pot. And then the second one sounds funny in English, which is a crackpot, a cracked pot. So we try not to be crackpots. And so although something's going in, as fast as it's going in, it's leaking out. So you're kind of getting it, but then if tomorrow somebody said, what was that all about yesterday? Yeah, well, no, it was pretty good. And you remember the title, but you couldn't say much else. And then the last thing is not to be like a poisoned pot. So the idea is you could put a lot of food into a pot, say a lot of rice, but if there's something poisonous, then all of the good stuff is ruined by it. So when we have a negative mind during teachings, we can be hearing wonderful teachings, but the negativity or the egotism in our mind really means we don't get the nourishment and that we poison what otherwise is wonderful. So anyway, there are lots of advice about how to listen to teachings. There's 6-fold advice, the 3 faults of the pot and all the rest of it. But the main thing is that we feel we're here for everybody, and in particular, our parents and all of those connected with us by the power of karma, especially in this life, because we know them, and they are part of us. They're part of our psyche. So we bring them all here with us. We're learning Dharma for them, and we try and make an excellent job of it. Thank you.
Sanje chodon soje chonam la jancho bado dane chamsanje dage jenso jipe sanam je rola penchara sanje tropare sho semchan tamche dewa dang dewe jodang dempare joche dongal dang dongal ji jodang tralware joche Dongal me pende wa dompa dong men tralware joche. Yerin chadan ne tan tralwe, tanyom chempola ne para jore chi. De yata shame shamawati shameta shatrum am kore marazite karota ke ore. Tejovati olo yane vishudan male malapana ye kukure kaka grase grasana O Mukhi Paramukhi Hamukhi Shametane Sawa Graha Bandhanane Nigrihita Sawa Para Pravadina Vimukta Amara Pasha Satapita Buddha Mudra Anut Katita Sava Mare Putsarita Parishude Begat Samtut Sava Mara Kama Olen Savel Lama Rinpoche Tagye Chewara Pende Denshola Kadren Champo Gone Chesonte Kuson Tuje Madrup Salto Sol.
Well, let's see how far we got. First, reminder of the basic thing. The three things that need each other in what we generally call mindfulness. And sometimes they're called, or they're referred to as like three tent poles. So you have a tent, like a teepee, that has three main poles. Sorry, I've only got two arms, but 1, 2, 3. And they hold each other up. So you take away any one pole, the whole thing collapses. So we had our three elements. General care. We care for ourselves. We care for our hearts and mind. We care for other beings. And that's expressed through our refuge, through our commitments, our vows, and through our bodhicitta commitment, and also through our Vajrayana Samaya commitments. So through all of those commitments, we are really, in general, as a background, caring for what we do with our lives. That's one tent pole. Then the second tent pole, which is awareness, which many people confound with mindfulness. It means being aware, being present in what is happening in the moment, fully present, being with. If we say aware of, it already makes a distance. One just is with what happens in the moment with your body or speech or mind. Being aware, being present. Then the third thing, which is mindfulness, technically speaking, properly speaking, is never forgetting, recalling the Buddha's teachings. Because we care, which is the moral aspect, then we are on a path. We are not practicing mindfulness just as a sticking plaster, as a therapy to help now. We're on a journey somewhere. A journey means we leave who we were, we're going to a new place. And where we're going in Mahayana is the Buddha's enlightenment. So care is the moral aspect. And what we're being aware of and why we're recalling the Buddha's teachings is because we care for our own journey to enlightenment. And then the awareness, which is the meditation aspect, is really what we need to cultivate first, because it makes us, as the name says, more aware of what? Go back to the morality. What are we doing today with our lives in general, this year, last year? Are we heading in the right direction? So we know karma exists. And so we become aware of what this mouth is saying, what this body is doing, what it is, and what our mind is thinking, planning, where it's taking itself. So the awareness is not mindfulness, properly speaking, but without it, mindfulness isn't really going to happen. So when we train in mindfulness, the meditation training of mindful walking, mindful use of our hands, body scans, being aware of our speech is absolutely necessary, because once we wake up to just who we are and what we're up to, then the Buddha's teaching takes on more and more power and more relevance. So that's the meditation aspect, very vital to cultivate. And then the wisdom aspect is the mindfulness. And this is compared to the eyes, which see where to go. And imagine you are on a real journey out in a landscape. It's amazing how our eyes are helpful. You see what's directly in front of you, where to put the next step, where not to put it. And but you're also looking 100 meters ahead, or maybe even 5 miles ahead, and planning out your best route in the next hour, over the next 5 hours. The eyes are vital, and our eyes that show us what to do with our lives are the guiding teachings of the Buddha. And then if we're in a Vajrayana circumstance, in particular of our guru, of our own teacher, because that's very relevant to you, tailor-made advice about what's important to do in your life just now. So we had those three. And then we looked into mindfulness of a body. And although this means being present with our body, and included in the body, if you remember, there is speech. Speech is part of body in that sense. Then much more important is to realize that we are embodied and we're in a human body. So we looked into that a little bit. We can only see what these eyes see and hear what these ears hear. Now, this asks for us to do what I call deep thinking. Give it quality time, hours, days, about what it means to be in a body. Because since you were conceived, and then you developed in the womb, and then you were a baby, and then a growing up child, life just happened. And you got so used to this body, and you got so used to it in the special way that children do, because the future is enormous when you're a child. It's enormous. It almost doesn't exist. So we're very used to being in a human body. We don't have objectivity of seeing our human incarnation as a Buddha might see it, or a Deva, a God, might see us here on planet Earth, completely limited by this biology, only doing what this biology enables us to do, dominated by the hormones and the endocrine system of this biology, which attracts us to each other, and so on and so on. So when we think about that deeply, then we try to get some context. And we can do that by, well, just thinking, really. Thinking and thinking of all the things that we've known about. So let me give you an example here. I had a deal at one point with local tree doctors who do a lot of tree felling. And when they take away tree trunks or sections of tree trunk, they have to pay the public discharge to take them. So rather than take them and pay to get rid of them, I would sometimes take a whole load of tree trunks, and then that was my exercise for the winter, was chopping them up. But one day they dropped a load of tree trunks, and the next day I could hear noises coming from the tree trunks. And that's not good. And these were quite strong noises. And it turns out it's a type of a very aggressive beetle called a Capricorn Beetle. And they will eat the timbers of your roof and do a lot of damage. So I had to call the guys back, and very reluctantly they put it all in the truck and took it away. But these beetles spend 7, 8, 9 years inside wood. Now imagine they don't have eyes or they don't have vision. All they have is eating wood. You spend 7, 8 years just in the dark, a wriggling digestive tube, eating wood. And then comes the time when they come out the wood and they transmute into a flying thing. I can't imagine what the transformation is like if you've been just a worm inside wood for 7 years and all of a sudden you're out there in gardens and landscapes and you've got wings and you can fly. Well, that's the good news. The bad news is that they get a couple of days flying, the time to mate, and then they're dead. So it's a pretty rough deal from nature. But when you imagine what it's like, you know, in terms of their senses, in terms of what goes on in whatever kind of mind they've got, well, it puts us in a different context. But then if you see now what we can do with machines, what for us is a pinprick of light in the sky, our telescopes can look at and give us these amazing colored images of Horsehead Galaxy and this nebula. So we know what's there. And microscopes, electron microscopes and other microscopes can go down, down, down to show us our DNA. Other beings, we call them devas, have powers of knowing, which make them aware of what we need machines to be aware of. So imagine their minds, which can be aware of galaxies and incredibly microscopic things, and things so far away they can hear, and so on. Sometimes meditators develop what's called the divine ear or the divine eye, and then they get these kind of experiences. So all of this thinking about other beings helps us put ourselves in context of, here you are just now in this human body with everything and the experience of this life is given you, which defines what you're worried about, what you're hoping for, what you're into just now, where you're living, the people you live with, the job you're doing. So mindfulness of body helps us be aware of the Buddhist teachings of being in a human body with birth, aging, sickness, death, and so on. So we thought about that. And then we went on last week to mindfulness of feelings. And we saw that once we're in a body with the history that this body and its 5 senses have developed, then we react all the time to what we encounter, either outside us, other people, life circumstances, the weather, or inside us, our own memories, our own thoughts and reflections. So each moment, before we can think, there is a nice, not nice, pleasant, unpleasant reaction. So last week, we looked at the Buddhist teachings about this reactivity. And we see how it was number 7 in the 12 links of interdependence, and how in the past, it has led us into action to get what we like, what feels pleasant, and to get away from what we don't like, which is causing us discomfort one way or another. So in our 3 temples, when we are practicing mindfulness of feelings, then the awareness of our feelings is very important. So once we've developed mindful walking, mindful use of our hands, and mindful awareness of our body and perhaps of our body's energies, that's very helpful, our inner energies that we can become used to feeling. Then we become aware of this reactivity moment by moment. I think one thing that struck me, because I found it very amusing, is watching people in Samiling come into the lunch. Now, Samiling lunch is served on one long table, and there's a series of about 8, 9 pots. And so when people come in, at first you're in a queue, so you can't really see anything except the pots. But when you get close enough, then your eyes can look along to see what there is. And your nose can start sniffing well enough to work out if the rice is well cooked or a bit burnt or whatever it is. No offense meant to the Samiling cooking, but looking along, there's kind of, oh, nice, not so nice now. This immediate reactivity. And as I said last week, if we imagine a ball where people are coming in through the door and being presented, like this one, don't like that one. We go through our day and we feel, even in our body, because we're now aware of our body and its sensations. You meet somebody and you crisp up, your stomach gets butterflies, you're not comfortable. You meet other people and something nice happens. And yeah, I hope you don't mind me sharing my random memories and reference points. But at one time I had to organize for the Taisitupa to go to the Vatican to meet the Pope. And I was corresponding by telephone and by mail with, this is before emails, with a cardinal in the Vatican. And so we had nice contact. And he had a name, Arinze, which I thought was Italian. And so when we eventually got to Rome and I went into his office to sort out the fine-tuning of the meeting, it was one of the very striking moments of my life, because first of all, I hadn't expected to meet a person of color. I expected to meet a white Italian of some sort. So a very African person. But his whole office was filled with such a feeling of love and warmth that it actually stopped you in your tracks going through the door. It was amazing. Kindness, love. And so these things, when we become aware of our feelings, it's not complicated feelings, what we think about somebody, how you feel about this president or whatever it is, how you feel about brown rice. Not that kind of feeling, just the instant reactivity. And then we think, we take on board the Buddha's teaching, we're mindful of them, about where we ended up, what we ended up doing, who we ended up living with, and how all of that started. And so often we can trace it back to feeling. Feeling. Something tempted us, something drew us. We were attracted. Or then we didn't do this in our lives because something at the time put us off. This reactivity. So now today, we go on to mindfulness of mind. Now, mind is an English word, and it's part of my life's been as a translator. And sometimes translating is all right, because you find a term in English that pretty much corresponds exactly to what's in the Tibetan or the Sanskrit. And sometimes you don't. So what we translate as mind in English, or consciousness or awareness, is not very, how can you say, precise. It gets all mixed up. When we say mind, do we mean our awareness? Do we mean our consciousness? Do we mean our cognitive processes? And then different translators translate the Sanskrit terms or the Tibetan terms severally, differently. So today we're looking at mind, and I suppose I first need to talk about the 5 aggregates. We didn't have many numbers up to now, 3 tent poles. So it's not a very Buddhist talk. We need a few more numbers. So the 5 aggregates. They're called skandha in Tibetan. Now, when we say mindfulness of body or a human existence, what it's called in the scriptures is a 5 aggregate complex which attracts suffering. This is what I am. You see, here I am in this human body with my human mind very much conditioned by my human body's experience in this world. And so I'm made up of 5 bunches of things. They're called skandha, means heaps. It's like 5 piles of distinct things. And by the very nature of those things, I get into suffering. The 5 aggregates which draw suffering to themselves. In Tibetan, it's called Nyawara Lempi Pumpo. And so it really has got a sort of magnetic feeling. Oh, you've got one of these. You're in for trouble. Because once we've got one of these, we get attracted to other people who've got one of these too. Or else we don't like other people who handle one of these differently than what we do, or who smell differently. We don't like their smell. There's a French expression, je peux pas le sentir. It means I just can't stand the smell of that person, and so on. So anyway, the 5 aggregates, the 5 skandha, show us these 5 areas of our being. It's not a teaching today on them, and they're in your backup document anyway, if you want to refer to it. So what are the 5? The first one is form. Mostly that means our physical form, our body, the body itself. But once you've got a body, the main thing about your body is not its flesh and bones and organs, it's what it can do. We can see, we can hear, we can smell, we can taste, and we have nerves that can sense. So you can't have seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and sensing without what they see, hear, smell, taste, and sense. So body also includes the general body of the universe. Seeables, hearables, smellables, tastables, and feelables. Body. So this is the material component of our experience, moment by moment, form. And even in another way, immaterial, because when you remember smells and places and sights and so on, sights and sounds, it's the form that pops up in your mind. Form. And then the second of the skandha, the aggregate, is feelings, which we looked at last week with mindfulness of feelings. So as the forms out there manifest to this body here, seeing, the hearing, smelling, then pleasant, unpleasant, nothing happening. Feelings. So the reason they're called skandha or heaps or piles is that how many forms appear in your mind in 1 hour? How many? How many moments of seeing, hearing, smelling, taste? So this is why it's like a pile of little beads. If every time a form manifested in our mind, we put a little bead, by the end of an hour, how many would you have? And each one will be different. You smelt your rice cooking, you smelt this, you smelt that. You saw this, you saw that. You remembered this, you remembered that. So a whole pile of forms. And then each time one of those manifested, we had a feeling. Nice, unpleasant, or no feeling. So a heap of feelings. That's as far as we've got. Now the next 3 skandha, aggregates, are generally what we will call mind. That's not a real hupu. That's my clock telling me it's 11 o'clock here. So the 3 ones that are called mind together are cognition. Let's call the third one cognition. It's samja in Sanskrit. Samja. Ja means knowing, sam means through coming together. Cognition. And then number 4 will be samskaras, mental events, mental activities, peripheral mental activities. And number 5 will be consciousness, properly speaking. Cognition, mental events, consciousness. So let's look at cognition. And it's easy to define. If you want to define it, just put RE in front of it. Recognition. It means we recognize. Recognition, cognition. There are two sorts. Without a reference, we can say, without words, without a label. Yeah, let's say unlabeled. So this, all sentient beings do. A baby hedgehog will recognize its mother. Maybe it doesn't have a word in its mind, mum. And then a rabbit will recognize this grass, that grass, and know the difference between them. This one's tastier, that one's not. They recognize. There is a previous experience of discovery, and then as life goes by, we recognize that through our previous experience. So nearly all sentient beings will do this, recognize. But then some sentient beings, on top of recognizing, will label. We give names. And then as humans, not only do we give names, but we can communicate using the words. Like all of my talk so far has not been real experience. I didn't bring you a real rabbit just now and grasses and show you rabbits eating grasses or a baby hedgehog. We didn't do a brain scan of the hedgehog to see if it was thinking when it was looking at its mother. Words. We can abstract the words from what they came from and use language to have abstract ideas. So they become very big for us. So two sorts of recognizing. You see, if you didn't recognize the words I'm saying, if all of a sudden, nga penna bukela lapkiyende, chiran soidine hakogemendo. See, if I was speaking Tibetan, all of a sudden it's just sound. You don't recognize. So you can't look at writing in your own language without being able to read it. Whereas if this was in a language you don't know, like Chinese, it's just colors, shapes. So this recognizing is a very, very powerful thing that happens in our mind. With or without labeling. Cognition. So when we have form popping up in our mind and we feel about it, then sometimes we will cognize and sometimes we will label. So we explore that. That's the meditation part of mindfulness of mind. We start to become aware of labeling, not labeling. If you go into a room, like you go into a shrine room, you will see hundreds, thousands of things. But then your mind will start speaking about some of them. You hear your thoughts saying, oh, a new drum. It means you recognized all the things that were there before without comment because it's familiar. We recognize them. But oh, the drum changed. Oh, your mind is saying, they have a new drum. A drum makes sense to you. New drum makes sense. So we become aware of our recognizing. one interesting instance is recognition and dismissal, whereby we don't allow our living awareness of the moment to engage with something because we recognize. I'd like to give you an example. We're just poking around in this topic. It's a huge and fascinating topic. Imagine you've been in retreat for a long time and you're up in a cave on a mountainside. You happen to have a telescope. And then in the far distance, you can see a shape moving. You can't even tell if it's human or if it's a deer or a bear. And you take your telescope and it's still too far away. And then bit by bit, you start to see, oh, it's a human. And then you're fascinated. And then there'll come a moment when you say, oh, it's George. And once you've recognized, then all of this vivid sense engagement of curiosity in the moment goes away. It's George. Or if somebody comes in the room where you're working, and you look up, oh, like that. And once you've recognized, you almost dismiss. They're not in your field anymore. So recognition, staying with it, not staying with it. Recognition is cognition. Now, why does recognition happen? Let's jump to skandha or aggregate number 5. Because of consciousness. So vijnana. Whereas cognition, samja, happens, jhana is ja, samja. Ja means knowing, sam means because of coming together. You recognize because your sense input comes together with your memory. You recognize. You know that one. Samja, coming together, knowing. The 5th one, consciousness, vijnana, means specific knowing. The vi, in that case, means specific jhana, knowing. So it means in each moment, then you're either mainly seeing, or hearing, or smelling, or tasting, or feeling with your nerves. Feeling hunger, thirst, heat, cold, textures, sensations. So vijnana or consciousness in Buddhism is very, very simple. It's like feelings are very simple, pleasant, unpleasant, nothing happening, that's it. Consciousness, we can't use in the sense of cosmic consciousness or, he is conscious of his role in society and so on. Not that kind of consciousness. It is incredibly raw. It just means the moment when your power to see links up with a color or a shape, which is what the eyes can see. They can't see things. The eyes only see color or shape. When, in this moment, bonging, this power to see meets with a power to be seen, then that is a moment of visual consciousness. The visual consciousness is just simply the meeting of subject and object, nothing more. So I can only see the shape and the color of this. That's all the eyes can do. Recognizing it as a stick to beat a gong with, that's cognition. That's cognition. The eyes and consciousness doesn't see things. It sees, eyes see colors and shapes. The ears connect with hearing consciousness, sounds. The tongue with flavors, the nose with smells, and our nerves with various stimuli, sensations. So this raw contact moment of our 5 senses, or the contact of our knowing mind with a memory, with a fantasy, with a plan for the future, that doing, when out of this whole box of our imagination and what we call mind, in this moment, you're thinking of porcini mushrooms, then, Why did you think of that? Doesn't matter. But in that moment, your power to know meets up with this memory. So consciousness, number 5, is very raw. It's simply the meeting of subject and object, no more. Through that meeting, there will be a lot of the time, not all the time, cognition, number 3. But then that cognition, so samja, triggered by vijnana, cognition triggered by consciousness, often leads to number 4, that we didn't get to yet, which are various peripheral mental activities. Samskaras, they're called. Mind events, mind creations. So once your nose has connected up with the smell of porcini mushrooms, then I could make an omelette with these kind of ideas. Or, I remember in Venice that time, I've never had porcini mushrooms served like that. All this kind of stuff. Or maybe actually I could convert myself into a porcini mushroom grower. Kind of all of this peripheral mental activities are thoughts, imagination, triggered by consciousness, and consciousness usually accompanied by cognition, recognition. Now, these processes are very, very fast. So in our 4 mindfulnesses, we start with the grossest, the easiest to become aware of, the easiest to learn about. Our body is kind of there all the time. It's available. We can walk slowly. We can think about it. Once we're used to being mindful and to holding in mind the Buddhist teachings with our body, then our reactivity of feelings comes and goes more quickly. But nevertheless, it's still within the range of fairly easy recognition. You can feel you are drawn to this, that you feel happy, you like that, you don't like this. We can be aware of it and then be aware of what it's doing to us, how it's leading us by the nose, it says in Tibetan, like a cattle, something with a ring through the nose and a rope, and how our feelings lead us into situations. But now, how quickly our consciousness links up in split seconds, seeing this, hearing that, and how quickly that triggers cognition, recognition, and how quickly that brings up memories, thoughts, associations, ideas, and the complexity of all the stuff it does bring up. Like in severe cases with trauma, how seeing something with consciousness, if you've been bitten by a dog, seeing a dog, and something in your mind says, oh no, a dog, the recognition, and then the memories of being bitten and all your fears and how you've been, how you've been trying to cope with them ever since. All of that's samskaras, peripheral mental activity. So we define another number, 51 principal peripheral mental activities, 51 key mental events. Now, and sometimes in Vajrayana, we see deities, they've got a garland of 51 flowers or a garland of 51 skulls. It's not an arbitrary, auspicious number. It's because of the way they are handling their 51 key areas of mental events. So when we have time, we study these so-called mental events, the samskaras, and we learn to recognize them. First, when we're sitting in meditation, and then as our meditation has helped us, as with all practice, we're practicing formally, training, so that throughout everyday life, we can be more and more aware. And then because of awareness, become more and more mindful. So it's quite subtle. Now, where are we going with this? You become more and more awareness of your mind, the play of consciousness, the play of your cognitive process of recognition, and what that trawls up all the time from the conditioning, the samskaras of our mind. We become aware of it. But then what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is holding in mind the Buddha's guidance. It's not just being present with those things. That's awareness. We want to manage all of that in a way which takes us on a path to liberation. And in particular, liberation comes mainly through wisdom. So we want to get wise about ourselves. That's the mindfulness, becoming wise. So wise in what way? Well, we need to be able to zoom out and realize that now we're aware of our body and its feelings and the mental reactivity that those feelings and our body produces moment after moment. What is this life? What is this mind? And how are we managing this mind of ours in the context of many lives? We are now, if we take, I'm sorry, but the language gets a bit complicated and there's nothing I can do about it. We've seen just now that consciousness was number 5 of the 5 aggregates in the analysis of the 5. But we should also know that, and especially in Mahayana Buddhism, consciousness is a word that can be used to englobe all 5. All 5. Because in Mahayana Buddhism, we know we are nothing but mind. That matter is just an experience of mind. There's no separate matter, separate material universe out there. Everything's mind. So then form becomes consciousness, feelings, consciousness. Everything is consciousness. And as you saw in a previous course, then we explore 8 key aspects of consciousness. It's not the topic today. But all of that to say that we realize that we are a stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness. Now, this stream of consciousness is forever. Whereas this body is just for this lifetime. And this set of reactions that have been provoked to other people, to places, to weather, to circumstances, is very much the karmic story of this lifetime. We're like an actor who's been thrust into a play. We have a story we're in, a role we play in that story that's evolved, and we are acting it out. But then when we die, it's the end of this story and the people in it, and the place we've been in, and the time and the history we've been plunged into. I was born a Cockney in the east of London, and then my life's been spent with Tibetans and in Scotland and in France, and all of that story. Next time I might be a Martian with the martial equivalent of dogs and cats, which are probably very, very different. Just now, this life, although it seems so long when we're in it, is not forever. Whereas your mind, my mind, is forever. And it's so important to be mindful of that. It's a story that changes. But it's always your story. You won't become somebody else. You will feel like you, life after life until you're Buddha. Even when you're a great, great bodhisattva. Beyond all suffering. Tangibly. It will still be your story. The great bodhisattva who once upon a time was Ken, born in London. Lifetimes and lifetimes ago. But it will still be Ken's story. This mind, this, we call it stream of consciousness. The word is samtana in Sanskrit. This samtana, this ongoing, changing story is forever. That's point one. And then point two, which is vital to know, is that how you use this mind now is going to write your story of the future through the power of karma. So this is wonderful in a way, because even in this life, you've been born poor. How can you practice generosity if you're poor? It's terrible. It's like catch-22. To have enough, to become wealthy in the future, we need to be generous. But if you're poor, how can you practice generosity? That's the good news. You can practice it in your mind. Practice it in your mind. So how we use this mind now, and through the power of using our mind now, what we end up doing in our daily lives, because we have this mentality, because we have this attitude, because we have this bodhisattva commitment. Everything we do because of this, in our case, bodhisattva mind, is right now, in this moment, and today, and every day, writing the story of your future, just like a pen writes with ink on paper. So our mindfulness of mind is not just being there kind of, oh yeah, thought, cognition, consciousness, or another cognition, mental event, memory. We're not just being aware and being with it. We are mindful. This word mindful, I was thinking this morning over breakfast, we do use it in the correct sense of remembering the Buddhist teachings. If you say something like, oh, Ken's coming today, be mindful of what you say to him. It doesn't mean be aware of what you say to him in the sense of just being aware in the moment, being with the sounds. It means, oh, there could be some consequences of that. Ken's touchy. If you say the wrong thing, Ken's going to get upset, and then we're all in for it. We're going to have another Ken moody visit, so be mindful of what you say, or whatever it is. That sense of be mindful. But what we are doing has implications. What we are doing shapes the future. What we are doing is important because of our moral compass, our care. So, one, to recognize that we are a long-term stream of consciousness, so many hundreds of lifetimes before, so many lifetimes yet to come. And we're just plunged into the details of this one now, through the power of karma. Then second, not just we are a stream of consciousness, but how we handle mind is all determining. It's the game changer for all the lives to come. And then helpful to that is a teaching which does not come so much in Hinayana mindfulness or in Mahayana mindfulness, but in Tantra and Vajrayana. Understanding of our mind stream. And I'm not sure if I included that in the backup document or not, but let me go through it briefly, because when we become mindful of mind, this is very, very helpful. Very, very helpful. And as a training, one of the best trainings you'll ever get, if you get it. It's called the Six Bardos. 6. Bardo is maybe a word you're familiar with through, most people think of Bardo as what happens in between life. That's Bardo number 6. What happens in between lives. But we've got 5 others, and these are very interesting because they are the 6 main modes. And there aren't 7, there aren't 8, only 6 main modes possible for this stream of consciousness that we are. 3 of them happen while we're alive. 2 of them happen when we're dying, and 1 of them happens between lives. And it's all about, and they're different. What happens in number 1 is not the same as in number 2, and that's not the same as in number 3, or number 4, or number 5, or number 6. They are different. And they are the main possibilities of our consciousness. So when we become mindful of our mind, then 6 Bardos. The first one is, I can't see everybody, I can only see a few people on my screen, but I'm assuming we're all awake and I've not put anybody to sleep, although that does happen in my live teachings in Samiling. I have a very soporific voice. So waking state is the first Bardo. So it means we see, hear, smell, taste, and we experience with our minds as we do in our waking state through the power of habit. The habit is strong, the experience is repetitive, so we don't wake up in a totally new world every day. It's a continuing, ongoing experience of mind. Katya heard on the radio a couple of days ago about a guy in Germany who had a car crash. Somebody's car came into the back of his car. He wasn't too physically damaged, but the brain lost one part of short-term memory. So by the time he was put back together again, he's functional, but he can't remember a thing of what happened yesterday. He has to write down. And then the next day when he wakes up, he has to remind himself who he was, where he went, and then he can live through his day. But anyway, we're not like that. We're in this rather solid feeling, ongoing story of waking state consciousness, waking state Bardo. Now, why is it called Bardo? Because Bardo means in between. It's because the waking state is in between last night's sleep and tonight's sleep. Sleep and dream is Bardo number 2, in between state number 2. So when you're sleeping and dreaming, you're in between yesterday's waking state and tomorrow's waking state. When you're in tomorrow's waking state, you're in between tonight's dreaming and tomorrow night's dreaming. The mind is impermanent. So we know those, we know the waking state better. Our dream life is much less predictable and fixed. And then, so that's what our consciousness, our mind stream gets into. We're awake with waking state experience, then we're in sleep with or without dream. Now there's a third possibility, and not everyone has that. Most human beings have waking state and sleep and dream. But the third one is deepest meditation, not just deep meditation, superlative. It's when we get to the state of meditating, where our mind is awakened to its true nature, to Buddha nature. So, whereas sleep and dream is a different quality of consciousness from waking state, very, very different. How is it different? In our waking state, we are in connection with each other. We meet other sentient beings, endless sentient beings, and we live in a world with them. We're part of an endless fabric. In our dream state, we are not in contact with other beings. It's you and your own mind. Very different consciousness. And then it's not fed by the 5 sense doorways. It's only fed from the 6th consciousness, your own mind, with its peripheral activities of memory, cognition, samskaras, mental events. So it's a different mode of consciousness. But then when we can meditate and we are Buddha nature, that is not like waking state. It is not like sleep and dream. It is totally different. So if we are Buddhist meditators and we have the privilege of having shunyata, true shunyata or dhammakaya meditation, Buddha nature meditation, that's the 3rd possibility. 3rd, bardo, because before you are in that state, you're making yourself a cup of tea, or a cup of coffee, sorting out your shrine room, getting your cushion, sitting down, then you do your prayers and you do your practice, and then after a while, nothing but Buddha. And then it's finished. Oh yeah. And then it's time to do your prayers and get up and go and have another cup of coffee. So you're in between. It's deepest meditation in between waking state moments. Now, there will come a time when this body's story comes to an end, and everything that kept it working so smoothly, even though it was up and down, what we call the 5 elements, will no longer support each other, work in synergy, and they will start to collapse. And along with the collapse of the elements in the body, this mind-body continuum that we had since conception will start to fall apart, and we'll have unique hallucinations, mental sensations, as our earth element goes and our body's weak, as our water element goes and we start to lose fluids and we feel very dry, and wind element goes, we can't breathe anymore. Our heat element goes, our extremities go cold, and so on. As it's the time of dying. Now the experience there is not like waking state in life. It's not like dream. It's not like deep meditation, deepest meditation. And it's in between. It's a bardo. It's in between what was all of this life and the next bardo. So eventually we die. And then after some time, day, 2 days, 3 days, the consciousness which came in at the moment of conception leaves the physical aggregates it's been with. At that moment, for everybody, even though it may only last for a second, there is a going back to the primal source, the clarity of Buddha mind. For everybody. For most people, it's a flash. It comes and goes. There's something almost scary about it because it's so vast, so big. For experienced meditators, it's a chance to avoid lifetimes and lifetimes of reincarnation. It's a time when one dissolves into the heart of everything, the heart of one's guru, the heart of all existence, beyond time, beyond space. So that is called the clarity or clear light, bardo. If you don't dissolve into it, which most people don't, then number 6 is what many people call the bardo. It's called the becoming bardo. It's everything that happens now that this mind is no longer confined to a body. It's rather bananas. It's a bardo in another sense. It's not just between the end of one life and the end of next life. It's somewhere in between the very limited that we have when we're incarnated. You know, you're a dog, or you're a human being, or you're a bird, this seagull. or whatever you are, you're limited by that karmic reality between the something, and it's between Bardo, the something, and everything, all possibilities. So the experience can be very varied. It's like people on LSD. Your mind is no longer limited by eyes and ears. You can think of something, you go there, you're there. You have no body to hold you back. You have superpowers in a sort of a way, but it's very unstable time. But it's a mind without the limits of the body, but still carrying its conditioning, still carrying its history, still carrying lifetimes of programming. So in that time, it can be like we go to heaven and somewhere very peaceful and restorative. It can be like going into chaos, going into hell. It can be a bit of everything. But you see, you don't have a body, so you don't get a rest. You can't, in this Bardo between lives, just go somewhere and lie down and recover a little bit. It is non-stop experience, vivid experience. The sounds can be hundreds, thousands of times louder than we experience them. And the sights and the intensity. And as you tune into people, the reality of their experience, the strength of their emotions. So at the end of this in-between period, it says most people are exhausted. And their karma to take them to a new birth pulls them towards their next installment of karma, and then they're reborn. Now, this is very helpful, these 6 Bardos, because it shows us all the possibilities of this consciousness of ours when we look at them in more detail. And we realize what this mind of ours is just now in the waking state and so on. We see it with some objectivity, with some long-term perspective, with some knowledge of its potential. We can train ourselves in this mind so we're ready for the experiences of the dying Bardo, so that we're ready to dissolve into our Guru's heart in the clarity, clear light Bardo. We can prepare this mind day after day for the next life and the life after that through living out our bodhicitta. So there's just such a richness we can hold in mind, be mindful as we're aware of our rapidly changing mind. So we have this sort of mindfulness of mind. As you can probably see from the backup document, there is a lot to learn, and some of it at first, until we become familiar with it and we're living it, looks rather technical, like 51 mental events and their different groupings. And their importance. In the 51 mental events, there are 11 virtuous mental events. So they're important. They show us what is virtuous to do with this mind that we're aware of. What will be bringing positive, helpful karma? What will be making this mind of ours healthy? 11 virtuous mental activities. Ways we can shape, we can create our mind. Now, unfortunately, the number is 11 for the virtuous. For the mind poisons, then we have 5, which then become 6, where we include stupid views, wrong views. And then on those 6, we need to add 21. What do we call them? Other non-virtues. So the ones that are very famous, you've got lust and hostility and pride and jealousy and ignorance. And then out of ignorance, we make a number 6, because the biggest ignorance is when our understanding of reality is harmfully wrong. But then we get 21 little specialities like narcissism, which isn't healthy, not good for us. So we try to understand narcissism. And then dissimulation, where we're living in pretense, and the different types of dissimulation, where we're pretending to the people we know, people of our family, sometimes pretending even to our Dharma teachers, hiding behind a mask. So we get, it's a terrible list, 21 subsidiary mental non-virtues. So they're important to avoid. So studying these things helps us to understand them. And then as we're aware, we can see them going on. And then we can remember the Buddha's teachings and work with them. If we find we're dissimulating, then we learn to be authentic, honest, not to wear a mask, how to be honest to ourselves, to others. If we learn that we're narcissistic, which may come as a bit of a shock, then we can work out what to do with it, and so on and so on. So, as I said, we mustn't be overwhelmed by the complexity, because this is Buddhist mindfulness. It's the whole foundation for the total path to liberation. We have time to get it right. I remember one of my very, very first Dharma teachers in Dharamsala, Akalukpa Tulku, and he said it's so strange. He said, in one way, every moment's impermanent, so we need to live in the moment. But he said, actually, for Dharma practice, you'd be well advised to remember that you've got forever to get it right. What he meant was, don't rush it. Make a lovely job of it. No, you've got time to get this really, really right. It was quite interesting to reflect on that. So, and Taisitupa said, is often quoted on this one. Even if in this lifetime you only make 1% progress, in 100 lifetimes, you're Buddha. And each lifetime, you're 1%, better. So the reality of Buddhist mindfulness, what we need to deeply understand, the light of wisdom that illuminates what we're being aware of as it happens moment after moment. Mindfulness of mind is a big topic. The difference between, I didn't even touch on it today, Vijnana, the stream of consciousness, and jhana, Buddha mind, which are both running parallel all the time. Right now, you are Buddha. Right now, you are a stream of consciousness. Right now, your stream of consciousness is blocking off your awareness of the Buddha you really are. So, mindfulness of mind. So maybe we'll stop there for this week, and it's time for your own feedback and questions and discussions. Maybe we'll dedicate there, because when I put these on YouTube, I take away the discussion part. So let's do our dedication now. Sonam di tamche sikpani tobnenye pedranam pamchene je gana chipala trupaye sipe sole drowarasho jancho psemcho rinpoche ma jepanam jejochi jepa nyampa me padam komne komdu belwarasho. So thank you very much.